Things pretty enthralling and keep you awake. Like I said, my name is Austin. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Export Abroad. What we have is global expansion software. So our overarching idea is that we want to help manufacturers and companies expand internationally no matter what size or where they're located. It's a pretty convoluted and complicated industry, particularly there's not a lot of, you either have to hire consultants or work with government resources to even try to think about expanding abroad, and yeah, I'll kind of go through that here in my presentation. But before we get into that, I want to talk about actually before Export Abroad. So I came from, when I was in college, I worked at the U.S. Commercial Service. What they do, if you're not familiar, is they help companies, small to medium-sized businesses in America, go internationally, specifically on the manufacturing physical goods side. So I worked there, and because I was an intern, I was forced to essentially do all the market research. And the way that they do their market research is they copy and paste data from the web into Excel, and then I would write models around it. It's really archaic, and I'm pretty good with computers. And it used to take me, at least 8 to 10 hours just to do one report. After that, I went to Delta Cargo for a little while, so I learned the ropes of air freight there. And then after I got out of school, I actually started throwing bags at Delta and working on Export Abroad. So meanwhile, my co-founder, Willie, he was finishing up his master's in bioinformatics at Madison. And he was also throwing bags at Delta. We just wanted kind of this flexible job where we could travel. I was going around and talking with potential clients and things like that. And I actually took a transfer down to Madison. So I was in Minneapolis, and I took a transfer down to Madison for a summer job. And actually, I met Willie. And it was kind of crazy. We actually first started talking because I was reading The Economist out on the ramp, which you don't see that often out there. So, we kind of hit it off, and I told him about my idea, about what I was working on, and it was kind of crazy. I actually pitched him the idea for Export Abroad in the bottom of a plane, and we just hit it off. And after I left in August, we started working together. We really didn't start working probably until February, but doing some pre-development, doing some customer validation, that type of stuff. I took a short gig at Wells Fargo. But the reason I talk about this is that if you're wanting to be an entrepreneur or whatever, you can leverage your experiences, and no matter what you're doing, right? You might be working construction. Just from us working at Delta throwing bags, we have tons of ideas about processes that could have been improved there, right? Because there's a lot of things that don't go well just because they just do them because that's the way that things are done. And the other thing is that you can find co-founders in unlikely circumstances. So I know there's a lot of networking groups talking about finding a co-founder and things like that. But if you keep your eyes peeled, you might find someone in a really unlikely situation. And so I just kind of wanted to give the background about where the idea came from and how we got together. And so after we started working together, we actually started researching the problem a little bit deeper. I had already done some pre-research, and obviously I'd worked in the industry before, but really we just kind of confirmed some of our assumptions that international trade, it's messy, expensive, and it's really lengthy. Right now, if you want to do a market research report, you hire a consulting firm, and they're gonna take 4 to 6 weeks for research, and they're gonna charge you upwards of $7,500 or above at least. And if it goes pretty in depth, it can get way more expensive. Like the McKinseys of the world, you start at $100,000. And if you hire a consultant, a lot of these companies had consultants almost on staff. They actually worked in their business, and some of them had upwards of 8 to 10. These are some of the larger companies that I'm talking about. But that was costing them $60,000 per week, right? And what you don't realize is not only are you paying all this money for these consultants, but your productivity goes down because your internal employees have to manage these consultants, make sure that they're staying on task, etc. And the entire process is really inefficient because essentially once you have the knowledge, people leverage it into consulting, and which is great. But the thing about it is that for these small to medium-sized firms, they can't really afford that. Basically, what we just kind of confirmed that getting research is hard to get, and then executing is even more difficult. Actually knowing what to do, because everyone with the knowledge is gonna really make you pay for it. We also research our market size. So global research and brokerage. In the US alone, companies are spending over $70 billion a year on this. Globally, it's over 170, and the market's growing at over 6% a year. That's the rate that international trade and globalization is happening. So it's a rapidly expanding market, and I would suspect that in the next few years, this growth will actually increase because you have more exporters coming onto the scene. It's not a well-known fact that only 1% of U.S. companies export. So that's 300,000 exporters, and there's 30 million companies total. When you kind of negate the fact that, you probably, of that 30 million, you probably have about 5 to 10 that are small, small business type situations, little stores, whatever. You still have this massive market that's really being underserved. And so our solution that we came up with, originally I just wanted to automate the research. That's what I was most familiar with. But what we realized is we needed to actually, we would hand the research to a client, and we can, after we automated it, and they would say, wow, this is awesome. What the heck do I do with it next, right? So they didn't know how to build that strategy and how to really sort of begin to execute. So our solution is tools to find, manage, and execute on opportunities in global markets. So the first part of that, we automate the 3 pieces: research, building your strategy, and execution. I should preface that our execution is actually currently a service because there's a lot of B2B matching services out there. One that everybody knows about is Alibaba. But the inherent problem with any B2B matching service where there's not strict guidelines set in place is that you can't separate the signal from the noise. So you don't know who's actually legitimate. In international trade, trust is the #1 thing. Because if I send something to Nigeria and they don't pay me, I don't really have any legal recourse, right? So we have this as a service so we can really get down in the weeds, and we're automating it with software actually as we speak. But our research is a highly tailored research report. So this is the first piece. A lot of companies don't even know where to start to go. So we can actually, when a company comes onto our platform, we actually ask them a series of questions about their business, about their product line, and in a matter of a couple minutes, we can tell them where your top international markets are. It's really cool, and it's tailored exactly for every single company that comes on here. So it's not sort of a stock white paper sort of situation that you see a lot of times. Then we actually have a strategy tool, so we can actually walk you through the process of what it takes to go abroad. So you have planning, creating documents, looking at free trade, any compliance issues you need to be worried about, and then actually collaborating with your team. So like I said, you're going to hear me talk about this a lot, but companies are still on Excel. So a lot of these even decently sized companies, we're talking to some companies that are nearing $1 billion in sales, and they manage their global sales initiatives on Excel, and they're doing their market research on Excel, they're doing everything on Excel. And so what we have is a cloud-based system where you can collaborate, so all of your initiatives are synced, you know where your company is wanting to expand, you know who's doing what tasks, and you can save documents in the cloud so everyone can see it, and you're not trading these documents back and forth, these Excel documents or Word documents back and forth, which you quickly get out of sync. If someone misses an email, whatever, things get out of sync very quickly. And then the last piece is this execution piece. So actually finding a distributor, a retailer, the best logistics person for your company, right? Actually getting the deals. Like I said, this is currently a service that we currently have. We actually just got a brokerage deal yesterday, and it's a really interesting sort of industry. And the goal is to actually build this network of global providers that we can automatically connect our users with, so you can go full circle, right? From identification of the market to actually selling in the market. That's to automate that entire process. That's our large goal. And the benefits of using us is that we can actually test new markets in half the time for a fraction of the cost, right? So if you're paying, most consultants start, depending on the firm, they'll start about $150 an hour. And we can actually, just automating the market research alone takes 4 to 6 weeks out of the time. And a lot of times, when you approach exporting, companies are they're looking for sort of a long-term partner in that market, but just to test the market and see if there's opportunities there, you really need to be executing pretty quickly so you don't waste a bunch of money. Like I said, we're also 100% cloud-based. We keep everybody synced. You have visibility company-wide of what's going on, and we get companies off of Excel. That was if you haven't noticed, that was my main thing at the commercial service that drove me nuts, was that I was doing all this stuff on Excel, and it was, there weren't any graphs. It was pretty ugly, whatever. And like I said, you have complete visibility, and the thing that we really are proud of is that it's super tailored. We have these feasibility analyses are highly tailored. We actually have alerts as well, where we can alert you to emerging trends. We actually pull over on any given day, about 7 to 10 gigs of data we store, and we can actually tell you on a daily basis what products are going into every single major port around the world. So we could tell you, hey, Mongolia's imported 5x the amount of oil refinery equipment here. Hey, oil refinery manufacturer, there's a trend happening here. You should be aware of that, right? And we just give you the overall worldview for your company. We monitor every single market so you can be aware of whatever's going on for your specific products and your specific company. So the main benefit, though, for these companies is that we want to help you grow and have the benefits of exporting. So the benefits of exporting are that you can mitigate business cycles easier. If there's a downturn in the U.S., most likely there's not contagion somewhere else in these emerging, fast-growing markets, so you can begin to weather those situations a little bit better. And you also have exporters just grow faster on average across the U.S. And there's just all these there's more opportunities. There's all these benefits of exporting that a lot of companies just aren't really taking advantage of. So that's our overarching goal is, no matter what your size is, you can begin to think globally and just really start executing. And so our model for the smaller companies, it's just a SaaS model. It's a monthly fee, and then other services are extra. So like the brokerage and some other services that we have. With enterprise, this is more Fortune 500, Global 2000. We normally do a 3 to 6 month paid pilot, and our fees are variable after that, depending on how many people they have on the system. Normally, they're averaging. We customize some of the data sets for them, and there's at least about 15 or more users at the enterprise level. And so who we target, our real sweet spot is actually manufacturers between 30 to 75 million. At that point, manufacturers have either normally taxed their domestic market, and they're realizing if I want to grow, I need to go somewhere else. And normally at that point too, they've also had about a few one-off sales to a foreign market. So they saw the benefit, and now they're a little bit hungrier for actually having a long-term strategy. Some specific verticals that we're seeing, we're actually pretty product agnostic, but some specific verticals that we're seeing that are particularly interested are food and B2B. So B2B means like hardcore building materials like industrial lights, industrial air conditioning, nuts and bolts, that type of stuff. Our research, we also distribute through NGOs, government organizations, trade organizations, and then other service providers. So there's like trade finance, like I was talking with trade accountants yesterday. So they're hungry for the research because they want to be able to provide that type of information to their clients. And so far, we have 2 Fortune 500 pilots. We have these 3 brokerage pilots. We have over 110 companies on our beta that we closed off in November because we're working closely with a few of those companies to just really help shape the product before we go live. And our plan is to launch for small to medium-sized businesses on June 1st, and it'll be a soft launch, but just to get some more companies on the platform and using it, and just really giving us that valuable feedback. And so our team is pretty awesome. So I'll start with our advisors. So we have Kalina from Stanford. She's an expert in international trade. She's a professor of economics. We have Maurice from the World Bank. He does data innovation at the World Bank. So he's making sure that we have the latest data that's available, the newest data sets, and that we're computing on it in the right way. And he also has a lot of experience in emerging markets. We think our particular niche is helping companies go to emerging markets because North American companies get outperformed in almost every single vertical to European and Asian in emerging markets. So that's really cool too. He's got a lot of experience in that. And our team itself. So I'm Austin. I gave you a little bit about my background. I used to work at the Department of Commerce, Delta Airlines. I helped. Back in high school, I helped grow an education site from 0 to 1 million page views a month. Right now, it averages, I think, somewhere around 600,000. So it does pretty well. And my co-founder Willie used to manage an international tech team for a startup in Philly. He's a big data guy. Actually, grew up in a logistics family in Africa. So basically it was kind of uncanny how we met and got together. We also have Mitch, Pamela, Hayden, and George is finishing up his PhD at Stanford right now, and he's going to fully join our team in September. But he helps us with a lot of our data right now, and basically almost everybody here we all ship code. We're actually a pretty tech-heavy team, which is kind of unusual, but it works for us because everything that we do is pretty technical and data-heavy. And Hayden helps me with business development, so that's been a real help. So just to give you an idea of where we're going, sort of our roadmap is right now we have this research tool. You can collaborate, these supply chain disruption alerts, other emerging trend alerts, a couple enterprise pilots. By the end of 2015, we actually want to be able to manage the communications between you and your potential buyers. So one of the other issues is, I'm sure everybody knows, everything gets lost in email, right? So if I'm getting, myself, I think I average like 150 emails a day, right? And it's pretty easy for me to lose them, right? So if we can actually begin to facilitate the conversation between some of these retailers and distributors abroad, we can actually begin to A, move things faster, and B, keep it in this one cohesive platform where you don't have to go, emailing all these different retailers abroad, and then it gets lost or it gets put in spam because they're coming from an odd domain, that type of thing. Also, competitor monitoring. This is this is a feature that we get asked for a lot. So based on your industry vertical, whatever your products are, we could actually monitor your competitors in that market. Some emerging markets, foreign partnerships. We have a few of these starting to surface right now. Some distributors in Tanzania, talking with guys in Uganda yesterday. And more brokerage pilots. We really want to get down in the weeds, really want to understand that a little bit better before we write any code, because we want to make sure that we're automating the right pieces. And long term is the partner matching, right? This global network of trusted, the best of the best people that want to buy your products, which also has the network of global partners, but that could also be in terms of service providers. So one thing of exporting that a lot of people don't realize is, a lot of these companies hire marketing firms in Europe, right, to market their product, especially if they're going up against a really hard sort of incumbent in the market. And the long term is obviously to automate this entire process, right? Have software where you don't really need to talk to a human at all other than talking to your buyer. I think we're getting pretty close, actually, but I just kind of want to give you an idea of where we're going. And I just want to reiterate as well, the overarching goal is to level the competitive landscape for all companies, regardless of location or size. So right now we're targeted in the US, but the idea is that you can actually move GDP, particularly in some of these countries where there's actually probably demand for their goods, but no one's ever even heard of it here or heard of it in Europe, right? So you can actually begin to, our goal is to actually get more exporters in the market and really actually, help just increase trade in general, right? So that 6.6% that globalization and international trade is growing, I think it can grow a lot faster, and with some of the agreements and things like that are coming out, I think it will grow faster. So we're wanting to ride this macro trend while also sort of helping out companies of all sizes no matter what. That's kind of my spiel. Like I said, I'm Austin Grandt. Here's some of my contact info, and welcome your questions.
Anybody have questions?
How have you managed to finance things going forward as a startup?
So we took on just a little bit of friends and family money, and so far that's been about it. We're out raising some. We're about to go out and start raising some cash before August, because in August all the investors normally go on vacation. So yeah, we've just financed it with some friends and family money thus far, and one angel investor.
What lessons did you learn from your beta trial period?
So it was really funny, actually. We actually started out, we had this really rough prototype that I would consider our alpha that essentially churned out Excel documents, but it was ranked by what countries we thought were best based on your product. We had that automated, and actually we took it out to the Ex-Im Bank conference out in DC. And the funny thing that we really learned very quickly was that everyone was telling us, if I'm going to take this to my boss, going to take this to a meeting, it needs to be more visual, and it needs to be, so actually one of the, I think the lessons that we learned was that actually design, even in these hardcore B2B tools, right? Because that's what we are, right? We're like this kind of business intelligence B2B tool. Design is actually starting to matter quite a bit, especially if you want to set yourself apart, because they saw, when they saw our Excel document, they saw the same thing that they're already doing, right? But if they see something with all these nice looking graphs and the design looks good, you set yourself apart, and then it becomes a more interesting conversation. So the other thing that we've been learning too is that there's actually a huge hunger for all these different types of data sets that we don't necessarily have in our database right now, but we're interested in procuring. So one of those services, when I was talking about how we make money, one of the extra services that we're looking at implementing is actually you can request the data set for like a flat rate, right? Because someone in almost have like a data marketplace then, because I mean, a solar panel manufacturer is interested in how many hours of sunlight do I have a day in a day on average in that country, right? Someone looking to go do e-commerce is looking at internet speeds. They're looking at how often do people buy on the internet, right? So there's all these different sort of data sets to even customize it further rather than off of our sort of core algorithms that we run. So those are kind of, I would say, probably our two biggest takeaways.
Great presentation. Do you see any potential users that are already abroad that are looking to come in the US, or are you just targeting users here trying to move out?
So actually, funny enough, so we spent some time last year out in Silicon Valley, and we had almost so many inquiries from Chinese manufacturers that we didn't really know what to do with. And they had interesting sort of, one of the things that we learned from that, so I'll answer your question in two parts. Right now we focus just on US because we can really work closely with them. And actually our location here in the Midwest, we actually came back from Silicon Valley because the Midwest and the Rust Belt has all these legacy manufacturers that are realizing I need to go abroad to continue to grow, to stay competitive type of thing. So we can work closely with them, and while we're still a younger company, we just want to focus on that. But actually, no, there is a ton of interest abroad, particularly, I mean, other places trade a lot more than the US, right? Like, because they have to, and if they want to be a big company, right? So the US, we're kind of spoiled here where we have, however many millions of people, and we're the largest market in the world. So you haven't really had to think globally yet, right? But so we got a lot of interest from Chinese manufacturers. We get some inbound interest from even people that are starting to produce in Africa, and I think that's a huge opportunity. And actually, the way that we've actually structured our platform, we're pretty country agnostic, but just in terms of targeting, so we don't spread ourselves too thin right now, we're very targeted just on the US and the manufacturers in our backyard that we can really work closely with and help them out.
To follow up on your point about being more visual in the way you handle the data, are maps going to be a part of that, like showing them where their products will be most desired?
Yeah. So right now when a company does a search, they basically they'll tell us what their product is, and we take that into account and things like that. And actually, the first thing that you see is a big map with the highlighted countries of what we think are the top 5, and then from there we actually go down and we compare and contrast sort of the growth of the markets. How many documents does it take to import on average there? What's your average import cost? And then you actually can go by on a per country basis. So yeah, it's very visual maps. A lot of graphs and things like that. What percentage, so we have a pie graph of like what percentage of the global import market do they make up. So what's like kind of interesting is a lot of times you'll see a country can very easily make up 13% of the world's imports of a particular product. And just off the top of my head, I mean, I think I was talking with, what do they do? Like electric motors, like not gas-powered motors, but like electric motors. I think China imports like 13%, and then the next one is Thailand with like 10 or 12, right? So those are huge markets for you, right? Someone has already demonstrated demand there. The only thing you have to be worried about is, can you be competitive, right, at a price point and with the manufacturers or people that are already sending stuff there. So where that competitive analysis in our long term comes into play.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So you mentioned that like McKinsey and some of the big firms are your primary competition right now, and they use a very different model than what you're able to do. How quickly do you think that they would be able to catch up and compete with you? And do you expect any other competitors to emerge into this market once you really are out there?
So we actually know that they're building software. They've been building some internal software. Because if you think about it, if you're consulting a big consulting firm and you charge $100,000 for a process, right, and you can automate half of that process, your margin goes way up, right? So we actually know that they're building software, and I mean, so I expect competition in the space, but there's always going to be, I mean, what company that's doing under $500 million do you know that's hired McKinsey, right? And even then, if you can have more data and have this sort of, because what we kind of pride ourselves on is we have the sort of a dynamic model, right, where we know we take into account your product, we're trying to implement these new extra data sets that you could incorporate into our algorithm, you know, we can still differentiate ourselves pretty quickly. In terms of people moving into the space, so in the business intelligence, there's a lot of people, there's a lot of startups in the space. A lot of people tend to focus more on like estimating foot traffic for retailers, estimating potential traffic online. There's business intelligence in terms of estimating sales, but and even there's a lot of supply chain stuff out there. But the thing that there's a couple people in our space, I would say too, right now, just of startups that I've met. But the thing, we try to take this unique approach where you're being more proactive about your growth rather than sort of reactive, which a lot of these solutions are, oh, you have an inquiry for the UK, here's how you should go there, right? And we're more about like, hey, the UK is your opportunity, now we'll help you get there, right? Because every company that I've talked to is even the Fortune 500s are reactive about their growth, right? They'll get a call from somebody in Dubai and say, hey, I want to buy your products, right? And then they'll say, cool, sounds good, but like they're not really being more proactive about saying like, oh, Dubai is a great market for me and I should be going there. So I think I think that there will be some competition, but I'm not particularly stressed about it.
What are the biggest challenges you're facing right now?
Yeah, so the biggest challenge is actually, so what I talked about, that proactive growth, that's actually, sometimes it's harder to convince companies that they're like, well, you know, we get a couple calls a month from Canada or something, right? But they have all this sort of latent demand that they could be meeting, right? So that's a challenge. The other challenge is actually just kind of, which has also been a blessing and a challenge, is letting people know about what we're doing, because it's not the, how do I say this? It's not the sexiest of things to be doing, right? But it's super important. But getting the word out and just letting people know what we're doing it's been a challenge, because we want tons of people to know what we're doing, right, to come to our platform. But at the same time, it's allowed us to work much more closely with a select few manufacturers and you know, sort of mentors that allows us to shape the platform and for when that prime time comes, right? I'm trying to think of any other challenges that I think we're going to face. Yeah, just the adoption, sort of this proactive versus reactive model. And the one thing that we also found out pretty quickly is it's a lot harder to convince someone to go to their first market than someone to convince to go to their second, third, and fourth. Right, so these new brand spanking new exporters that are just selling in just the Midwest or even just in the States, it's harder to convince them, hey, you should go to, you know, Canada makes a lot of sense for you, right? To that first one, because they've never done it before, right? So that's I think that'll be another hurdle once we get past sort of our core sort of sweet spot where, you know, they're going to one or two countries, sort of. So yeah, those are some of our biggest challenges.
And I apologize if I missed this. I came a little bit late. But what's your sort of market strategy? How do you get reach and awareness for potential customers?
Yeah. So the way we have a few different things. We're taking a long-term approach in terms of content. So we've been churning out quite a bit of content, either educating people about international trade. I've been writing some ebooks on like how to test your markets more faster and things like that. So that's one way, but that's a really super, for anyone out there that's doing content, it takes a long time, right? Like, I mean, we do a few blog posts and stuff like that a week. They get shared around a little bit, but until you really have that sort of credibility and high-level awareness, like sort of cloud cover, it's a pretty tough market to do. Before I did this, one thing I didn't mention too, I used to manage like, I have a lot of experience in internet marketing, so I used to manage like 500 grand of AdWords spend. So I'm pretty familiar with that. I think that a lot of our keywords are pretty cheap, actually, for some of the things that we think that we could be targeting. I think that's another really good way to get that market awareness. And then the last is really just to, I think in our industry in particular, because there's so many trade shows are how people live and die, that word of mouth is actually going to be, and I think in most SaaS startups, it's actually the best way of getting that sort of awareness in your particular niche or industry, right? So, yeah, exporting is all about going to, the one trade show in Germany or Dubai a year. And I think our goal is once we start doing right by some people, word will spread fast. Particularly if we can do right by some of the bigger companies that are at all these trade shows, right? So.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for presenting.
Thanks.
Austin, a round of applause. For the next 15-20 minutes, Austin will be here and Willie will both be around. If you want to go up and ask any questions individually, you're more than welcome to do so. And thanks to everybody for coming.